Are we in the end times? Is this the end of the world? Well-meaning Christians are bubbling up with this question and trying to answer the question because we're in the midst of, in 2020, a pandemic. The first time I heard this interpretation of cataclysmic events to mean that Jesus was coming now was in the 1970s. I was a young student, teenage years, at the end of the 70s, and I heard a well-meaning Christian scare me to no end that Jesus was coming in his lifetime and soon, because we could look around and see the economic uncertainty of the 70s and the cultural decline of morals, and Jesus didn't come. You know, in that same season when I heard that and was rattled, there was a book floating around. Someone was making a lot of money selling a book about Jesus coming again then. And my father addressed it in a sermon. And what he did that was brilliant, instead of making a whole sermon, he just did a little snippet. That's what I'm doing today. And he said simply, from the same interpretation of scriptures that deal with calamity and difficulty before the return of Jesus, he referenced Jesus himself, who is very pointed in Matthew chapter 24. No person knows the day or the hour that these things would come to pass before Jesus' return. So I say the same thing to you. There is no accountability for people who make these claims and are wrong. They cleverly often project them vaguely enough to sell books, maybe fill the offering plate, and again, some of them are probably well-meaning, faithful Christians, if not most of them. But it all falls in a category that I have always rejected. Manipulation by emotion, fear. I don't believe that's how God calls us to himself as the primary message of the good news gospel. Gospel means good news. We focus on who God is and what his promises are. We do not focus on the season we're in to interpret events. So let me just give you one little introduction to the position that I hold on the end of the world to address it from a different interpretation. First, I don't believe we're at the end of the world. I have heard the message from the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and beyond. Jesus has not returned. Conveniently, often within the next 5 years or within my lifetime, and many of those people have passed away. There's no repercussions for being wrong on this subject. We get a pass, it seems like, with Christians. The position I hold is one that is less well taught or known. And it has to do with interpreting the words of Jesus to predict the end of the age, not the end of the world. And so I've written a little article on this where you can go further into the main points of this position. It's called partial preterism, and it is not commonly known or taught, but it is not in agreement with the Left Behind series. It is not in agreement with the people who talk about this horrific season occurring and then Jesus is going to return. It actually suggests that the horrific things that are predicted in prophecy in the Bible have already occurred except for the return of Jesus. So be open to new things and know this. From me, you'll never hear a manipulation based on fear to motivate people to know Christ, because no one knows the day or the hour. And the vast majority of Jesus' teachings, especially for people who didn't know him, for those who didn't know him, was based on an invitation of love to be welcomed back into the family, not fear. Christians, believers, we should be challenged to be corrected by a right interpretation of Scripture, and I leave it to you which interpretation you will agree with. I don't believe we're in the end of the world. And I don't believe it's right to manipulate people. And I stand by the interpretation of Scripture, which suggests something more broadly important to Christians. God is faithful and good, and we should return to him in all seasons, good or bad. Thank you for listening.